the spacer block. A useful tool or a menace to website creation. This simple little block has caused quite a bit of controversy in the development community since it was introduced with the WordPress block editor almost 6 years ago. It's been around since the beginning. Its existence brings up some feelings and strong opinions, and so I wanted to sort of set the record straight a little bit, maybe give a little bit of a developer viewpoint on why it may not be such the menace that we all thought it was. Its function is exactly what it sounds like. It's a thing that adds some space between elements on a page. And before we had, block gap and padding and margin, all of these spacing controls on all the blocks that we have now, the spacer block would allow us to easily create that space. Now, according to some, the block editor should have just waited until we could control the spacing on everything, and the spacer block never should have been released. It has no place in modern development. A less extreme view is that the spacer block was fine, but now that we have more controls, it should really just be considered a legacy block that needs to be phased out and really shouldn't exist anymore. Now, I was one of those people that was criticizing the spacer block. Empty divs, really? I was not a fan. I immediately felt annoyed by it. But as I came to use the block editor and to understand the different levels of skill, the different situations that come up where spacer blocks might be the best way to go, I kind of have come around to its existence, and I think it may have its place in a couple of small areas. So let's examine this simple but controversial block. First, a little bit of brief background on the spacer. We've used empty elements in web design and development for almost all of time. When we used tables for layouts, we would keep table cells empty. We would create empty divs that were the clear fix to help bump content below things that were floated. This is nothing new in terms of a concept, but as CSS has evolved and HTML and the way we lay out pages, we're now able to create much more robust and flexible layouts without so much unnecessary markup. We don't need to have so many bug fixes and workarounds and wrappers. We can do things a lot more efficiently. And the tools that we use to build websites has also evolved. We, at the beginning, may have overlooked some inefficient code that happened as a result of being able to build websites easily and visually. It was exciting. It was a new evolution of what web design and WordPress was capable of. But once that novelty wore off and we kind of realized the divception was here to stay, and we were now provided with more options. We had different builders. We had different ways of building these pages within WordPress. The nested divs kind of seemed to be the indicator of how good a builder was. How clean was the code output of a builder, and how many containers did you have to sift through to find where that one margin bottom was? And is it even in the settings, or did they stick it in this custom CSS somewhere? Spacers seem to be lumped in with that mindset. A shortcut that was a sign of an inexperienced developer, bloated the code, and indicated a subpar website editing experience. And that's where the passionate feelings come in. As someone who used to look down on the spacer block, I can empathize with those who still feel that way. And for a majority of the time, they're right. Spacer blocks go against our instincts to write clean code. Having an HTML element that is purely for layout or styling is not the proper way to do it. It's not how HTML should be written, and it adds bloat. Some critics claim that the inclusion of the spacer blocks is dumbing things down. Instead of only providing the proper methods to create space, it is 100% inferior to what they consider the superior way of creating websites. Those are some pretty harsh words, some pretty deep-seated feelings about this tiny little block. And it's true that the best method to use gap, margin, and padding to create space around elements is probably the best way to go about something. Even better if it follows some kind of, regular amount of spacing that's taken throughout the whole site. You have a padding system that the designer has put together, and in between sections is 12 pixels and 24 pixels and things. If it's super neat, that's great and it feels really awesome. Spacing would then only need to be adjusted in places that would need to override that, and that's a sign of a really good, performant, easy to maintain website, right? So if that's the best way that we're creating space on a website, why keep the spacer as an option? Why not guide people to add space the right way? There may be a benefit in specific instances that make this element still useful. We don't create pages with content-driven HTML only. We don't just stick in a main and then, an H1 and some paragraph and an image tag. We use wrappers and pseudo elements to help us control layouts and set gutters and max widths and keep things centered and add extra things to the page. And the spacer is no different. The bloat that gets added is pretty negligible when it comes to the overall page load size and speed. A good rule of thumb is that if you find yourself adding more than a few spacer elements to the site, maybe even to each page, that's when you start to need to examine, your overall approach to the website and start to look into some of those better options. It's not that I think the spacer block is better in some cases, just that it has a use case that does make it an acceptable alternative. On some level, the idea of having a spacer block may be intended to give people a way to add space easily. It lowers the barrier of entry for creating websites with WordPress. It's not that people who think that the spacer block should exist means that we then must believe that beginners are too stupid to understand margin and gap. That is by far not the case. But no one should be made to feel inadequate for using the spacer block or any other tool that gets the job done. It's just that more people shouldn't have to understand the philosophies and methods behind the different spacing types in order to create space between things, especially when margin, padding, and gap can easily become much harder to maintain than inserting some spacers. If I'm going into a website that exists and I'm trying to help somebody clean it up or fix it or create a new page template, and I go in and I see, 13 spacers, well, that's an indicator that I need to go in and set some spacing parameters. And I can go ahead and do that and then easily apply it to things and then go in, shift click on a bunch of spacers and delete them. If somebody's gone in and added margin, top, bottom, left, right, padding where it should be margin, gaps that are too big, that is being overridden by margins, and that's where it starts to get messy. And that's where when you give somebody all the tools possible, it could be that you're assuming that they're going to take the time to learn the right way when that's often not the case. Somebody just wants to have a website that works. So they just want to get the job done. And so they pick something, they adjust it, it moves it, and it's done and it's good. And they're not thinking through the philosophy of, when should I be using this particular type of space? So when you have somebody that maybe isn't necessarily concerned with the right way or the best way or the most performant way to do something, a spacer block could be a good way to make it easier to adjust or maintain or improve in the future without having to then go back and redo all of the margin and padding. So let's get to some of those use cases. If you understand block gap, margin, padding, min height, max height, flex, grid, there really isn't a reason to reach for the spacer block in almost any case. Whenever possible, don't use it. Use a maintainable system. That's what a theme is for. That's what patterns are for. But a theme can also set a default for the spacer block. So when it does get used, it has those default settings. And currently in development is allowing for fluid preset options to choose from without having to set, variations or block styles or use a plugin to adjust a spacer for different screen sizes. there may be times where it could make sense for this little block to exist. And here's where I found it could be helpful. First is the example that I just described. Someone's not sure, or they don't have the time, or they don't care, or they're annoyed, or they're frustrated, and they just don't know how to do the spacing correctly, and they don't understand what method to use. It's just too much. Use a spacer. It's going to be okay. Another situation that I came across that I found to be the most common is when there's two synced patterns next to each other. And the space just happens to not be a part of either one of those components. The space then becomes its own entity. Now, it's not ideal. Obviously, you want to create some kind of spacing around those elements, and if they're butting up against each other and happen to need more space, then maybe, examine why you need that space, or examine if that component happens to need more space throughout the site. It could be worth looking into, but sometimes it just happens where these two synced patterns are next to each other and need some space in between them. So that space has to be inserted in order to not have it become part of one of the other components. There might also be a situation where there are two blocks that are next to each other that don't let you adjust individual spacing. It's a possibility, whether you don't want to wrap it in a group for some reason, or it's a custom block or something from a plugin, or, it's just a thing that you've found yourself not being able to adjust the spacing between these two items. The spacer block could be something that you can stick in there to at least alleviate some temporary stress if you're, someone who's getting in there and not 100% sure of what they're doing. And it's good to just have that to reach for. The spacer block, as I said earlier, exists within that list of elements. I can just go in and click on them all and delete them. And so it could be easier to conceptualize for people and see where that space is and click on it and adjust it, rather than having to go through maybe some nested divs and groups and adjust margins. It's easier to just see where that space is. If something is helpful in any way for someone and doesn't create accessibility or performance problems, its existence doesn't need to be thought of as a plague on modern websites, but a wonderfully simple and usually harmless way to add space to a page. So let's get into some of the anatomy. When you're adding the spacer block, there is an interface to adjust the height. We're going to go into our block editor. I have just a blank page here. It's just a regular old page. Nothing's on it. I'm going to add the spacer block. You can do that either through the block inserter at the top. You can do it through the block inserter on the block level. You can hit the slash and then start typing in spacer. So now we have our spacer on here, and there are a few ways that you can go about adjusting the height of this. You can click and drag right on the interface itself, and that is going to adjust the height. You can type in a specific amount in the side panel where our controls are in our settings. So you can just put in different amounts. You can use the arrows to go up and down. You can adjust the unit. You can do it in pixels, percentages, etc., depending on what's enabled in your theme. Or you can use this input slider to adjust it as well. If you toggle the size preset on, you can then also use those presets that are set in your theme that are a little more global when it comes to the spacing sizes that got set. This, as you'll notice, this core spacer block is not responsive. There's the flexible spacer block plugin that I have included. So let's go ahead and update this so we can keep our spacer block. If we look in our plugins, you can see that I've got flexible spacer block added. So if we go back to our page and we kind of do what we did before, where we say, but instead of spacer, we say flexible spacer, that gives us a control to do a different amount on mobile, tablet, and desktop. If you'll notice, this gives us the same interfaces. You can change the height for all of them. You can change the height separately. You can give it negative space. And then this has, plugin settings that you can do where you're sort of always showing the blocks in the block editor. You're setting some default responsive things. So it has some global settings that you can use as well. As I mentioned earlier, there's also some work being done on the ability to define different flexible presets for a theme. So you would maybe be able to select one of the spacer sizes that utilizes a flexible spacing sort of mechanism rather than having to utilize the flexible spacer plugin. That was a sticking point for some in the never spacer camp, but rather than think of flexible spacers as doubling down on an embarrassing block, it's more productive to think of it as providing the missing feature of the block. You can set specific values for breakpoints with the flexible spacer plugin, but a core spacer block is going to be much more useful and solve a pretty big pain point for a lot of users. The bottom line is that this may not be a compelling enough reason for some people to feel that it has its place somewhere within the WordPress ecosystem, and they may still hold to their firmly held beliefs that the spacer elements should be eradicated, and they are free to not use them or advocate for them. And that's the beauty of having more than one way to do something.